Hare Krishna, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I am taking another question in my Bhakti Q&A series. This one goes like this. I wanted to know if Achyuta could talk about the spiritual traditions of Bhakti when you are mourning a loved one and the process of mourning someone who has passed. Also, the philosophy behind it and how it helps a person grieving. Another way of phrasing this could be, I'm wondering about the approach to mourning somebody who's passed. What's the philosophy behind the grieving process, if there is one according to the Bhakti tradition? Great question. And hopefully this is a helpful answer. So one of the two primary texts of the Bhakti tradition, I mean, there's many, but two of the primary texts are the Srimad Bhagavatam, sometimes called the Bhagavat Purana, Bhagavan being God, the person of God, the being that we have a personal relationship with, and the Bhagavad Gita, which is like the song of God. And it's a section from the epic Mahabharata where Krishna and Arjuna are basically talking about life and the meaning of life while about to go to get involved in a very difficult battle. There's a couple of things that come to mind from both of these that might be helpful in terms of how we process death, dying, grief, what kind of space we give for it. So in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna has to go to battle against family members. It's a civil war, and he's on the righteous side of the war. The other side has made a number of transgressions and are seeking power in an unhealthy way. And yet he's still lamenting that he has to go to war, and he has to do what's right. He has to fight in this battle, but he doesn't want to have to fight people he loves. It's this difficult ethical dilemma. And he's mourning, he's lamenting. Sometimes people call it Arjuna's lamentation. There's a book, obviously, in the Bible called Lamentations. And it's from this starting point of Arjuna lamenting about his situation that the Bhagavad Gita begins, and this whole, treatise on the nature of reality and the soul and God and prayer and love and death, and all of it starts to unfold. And one of the first things that Krishna says to Arjuna is that you are grieving, lamenting, mourning, for that which is not worthy of mourning. Now, he doesn't tell him mourning is bad. Stop crying, stop feeling difficult feelings, that they're bad feelings. He just simply says, let me tell you why you don't actually have to mourn or grieve. You see, you and me and all of the people on this battlefield have had innumerable experiences before this one. We've all lived and died before, and we will again. I can remember all of these things and you can't. And this is God talking, so know that who you really are and who everybody on this battlefield really is. You are all eternal spirit souls. So you're all part of God, and you're all unique eternal beings. You can't be cut by a sword, literally, even though people are about to cut the bodies with swords. You can't die or be harmed by fire. Nothing can actually harm the soul. You're untouched by any of these experiences. And so don't lament. This is part of your destiny. Just live it. And if you do so with a brave, courageous heart, you'll be doing your duty. You'll be doing what you have to do. You'll be living the life meant to be lived, live or die. And that's what success is actually all about from a yogic standpoint. But also, if you do what you're about to do and you keep divinity, God, source, in your heart, and stay yoked to me in anything that you do, in all experiences, living and the dying, that'll be successful. So those are kind of like the basic instructions that he gives him. And that's the philosophy of Bhakti Yoga when it comes to grieving. Is it okay to grieve? Of course it's okay to grieve. Is it natural to grieve? Of course it's just human. It's part of this world, the attachments that we form in this world to each other, the bonds that we form, and letting go of them is naturally difficult. It goes a step further when we get into almost like an unhealthy level of attachment or grief where we can't let go. And in not letting go, actually, in many cultures and traditions, like you look at the Tibetan Book of the Dead and some of the things that there's a great documentary that was done, and Leonard Cohen was the narrator, and it was on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. One of the things that's very important is that the environment of the soul upon death not be hindered or weighed down by the mourning or clutching of other human beings to the soul when it's trying to make its passage. That's the same thing is true in many other traditions. When I was working with ayahuasca in the Amazon for many years, in ceremonies, it's incredible how light we have to become in order to work through difficult passages. I remember in the most, intense psychedelic ordeals that I went through, I couldn't hold on to anything, and if I tried to hold on to something out of fear or insecurity or anxiety, the only thing that would happen was whatever I was holding on to would amplify the anxiety and fear. Had to let go very, very deeply at times in order to move through certain passages in these altered states of consciousness. What I learned from that was that I needed to progressively drop into that aspect of myself that is not ultimately identified with my body, what to speak of my skin or gender or race or creed or family or karma or relationships. And each of us in the Amazon, one of the ways that ayahuasca is talked about is as something like the little death before the big death. We go through ordeals in life spiritually. We go through them, in our relationships or our jobs or our health. We go through these ordeals, and pretty much everyone comes out saying the same thing, which is, even in near-death experiences, there was nothing left to hold on to. And seeing that's some place we're all going to have to deal with when we die is so valuable, even though it's terrifying, and it's not like we need to go and be having near-death experiences and complete, like ego dissolutions, or we don't need to ride that roller coaster every day of life. But it's important that our spirituality bring us back to that bottom line, which is that I'm only here temporarily, and I will have to let go of everyone and everything. Even, the most basic things, mountains, oceans, these are temporary. They were not always here. They will not always be here. The sun, the stars, so many of the stars that we see, the light that we're seeing, the stars have already burnt out. So if we keep that in mind while grieving, then we can grieve with almost like a variegated grieving. The grief can be thankful. The grief can be happy. The grief can be about loss all at once. When we grieve in that way, it's really a celebration of life. It's really a celebration of the soul. So it's not that grieving is bad. It's how do we grieve? How do we grieve in a way that allows for the soul that's passed to keep traveling well, for our grieving to be a part of the energy and the vibrations that help carry that soul back home to God. That's how we should grieve. And that's inherently what Krishna is telling Arjuna when he's grieving at the beginning of the Gita. He's like, look, I understand, and don't forget, all of these people are eternal. All of these people are my children. All of us will be okay. None of us can actually be harmed. This is part of destiny. Accept it and remember me while you do. Beautiful advice. The other book, the Bhagavad Purana, major text in the Bhakti tradition. King Parikshit, he's been cursed because of a transgression that he made to a Brahmana. So the Brahmana's son curses him, and he has 7 days to live before he's going to get bit by a poisonous animal. So he does what any good, God-fearing yogi would do. He gets to the banks of a holy river, sits down, and asks the wisest sages to please explain to him what he should do with his 7 remaining days before he dies. And the essence of the rest of that 18,000 verses, if I'm remembering correctly, 17 or 18,000 verses, the essence of it is We come here to live and to die as eternal spiritual beings. There's many stories in the Bhagavad Purana that speak to grief. One of them, for example, is there's a famous character that dies, and there's people just totally lamenting, and really wailing and grieving, and kind of an unhealthy level of attachment. And there's like the I hope I'm not messing the story up. The soul comes back and immediately like is addressing the people who are mourning, being like, there's like a sage or something that like addresses them as they're mourning this character who's died. And this, I think it's the sage, and the sage is like, where has he gone? Where has he gone? And they're all wailing. And he's like, well, he's right there. If you think that who you're mourning for is the dead person before you, then he's still there. But if you have any care or concern for who this person actually was, then you know that they've just simply left their body and that they've gone to wherever their next destination is. And you should be thinking about that person, not this body that you're obsessing over right now. So he gives them kind of like a stern talking to. And so that's, again, the message. There's messages for parents all over, messages about things that we find dear in nature. For example, a sage that becomes attached to a deer and really has a hard time with the idea of this deer dying. And then he becomes a deer in his next lifetime and has to try to remember his yoga, despite having got so attached to the well-being of a deer in a previous lifetime. Parents, messages saying, look, you can't always control when your children are going to be sick, or what kind of choices they'll make, or when they'll come and go. So bhakti is always honoring of every single emotion, as long as we are bringing that emotion into the proper context. If we can see grief and lamentation in terms of our love and appreciation for a soul that touched our lives, that's sacred. If we're only lamenting the passing of someone who we've only identified with a body, that's problematic. That's going to complicate things for us and potentially for that soul as well, if you believe what some of these traditions have said about the importance of how we treat the soul in death. What may hinder its transformation? I don't know. So at any rate, I think that the important thing is, some people will think that because we say you're not the body, that means that it's a callous point of view toward grief, that it's inhuman, and that it suggests being detached from other people and from love. And that's not it. It's actually about spiritualizing the emotion of grief, which we do when we recognize that the people we're grieving for are eternal beings, and we try to hold our grief within the space of joy and prayer and thankfulness and gratitude. Thank you, God, for giving me this person for however long they were in my life. These kinds of things are really important. Not that it's easy, but spiritual life, these challenges, if we take them up, the spiritual life is not easy, because the rewards are also so great. When we take up the challenge of grieving deeply with heart and a kind of courage, it transforms us. That transformation, it's not cheap. You know what I mean? We can't just do yoga on the good days. It's especially important to do them in the challenging days. So how do we spiritualize our emotion of grief, I think, is the question. So I hope that this has been helpful, and please keep the questions coming. Feel free to email them, put Bhakti Q&A in the subject line, email them to info@nightlightastrology.com. That's what I've got for today. I hope you're doing well. Hare Krishna.